going? That the volume is needed.
Now, what we just illustrated is that the market in capitalism, it regulates itself. When Becky wasn't doing a good job, the government didn't step in and say, we want other people to go someplace else besides Becky if they have some sort of archaeological project that they need done. That's not the way it worked out. People made that decision on their own. When Becky made her prices higher and they chose to go to another place, the government didn't tell people you need to shop someplace else. Becky's competitors essentially did that. That concept is sometimes referred to as the invisible hand. The government isn't regulating how business is done. There's this kind of unseen force, essentially through competition, that's supposed to, number one, keep quality of products high and keep prices low. Because again, if you're making a bad product or service, people are going to go someplace else. All right. Another key component here is competition. Who else knows what they want to do? John, what do you want to do?
Science and music.
Okay, music. Let's say you open up a music studio, except you're the only one. Okay? You're the only person that offers that service. You're recording stuff, you're producing it, and you're actually making the CDs and selling the CDs to stores. If you have absolutely no competition, how much can you charge people? As much as he wants. They don't have to buy it, but if they want to buy it, they don't have another place to go. This system only works if people actually have competitors. That's the way it's set up. All right. Yes. There have been times when companies have gotten too powerful. Yeah, the Rockefellers would be a good example. Carnegie Steel would be a good example. There have been times when people have gotten too powerful and have essentially taken over the market for a single product. Yeah, that's when a monopoly forms. Monopolies are not good for capitalism. Today, the government has something called antitrust laws, where they try to break up companies. AT&T has actually been broken up a bunch of times into smaller companies. Recently, the government tried to sue Microsoft as a monopoly to try to break them up under antitrust legislation. That actually wasn't successful. They didn't manage to break up Microsoft. Trying to think of other ones. Standard Oil, a lot of the oil companies that are around today, a lot of gas stations, originally were part of Standard Oil and are now separate entities. But anyway, monopolies are not good because, again, if they control the entire market for one thing, they get to set the prices and they can make the quality however they want. Okay? All right. Another key trait is in a capitalist society, you are essentially working for you. All right? When Phoebe was writing her books, like she was doing it for her own benefit. So you work for your own benefit. But I'm going to do a little spin-off here. When Phoebe was doing really well, what did she have to do in order to keep up her success? She had to delegate. She had to delegate her workload, so she had to hire people. The spin-off of capitalism is that by working for yourself, it actually benefits the group. Take somebody who opens up a small store. Okay, it's really hard to run a small store by yourself. If you have to put in long hours, you're doing the inventory, you're making all the orders, you're managing the register. Most people have to hire help. They might have opened up that small business to make money for themselves, but by doing that, they actually provided jobs and services and goods for other people as well. So you work for your own benefit, but that also benefits the group. All right.
Hi, and welcome to the Chapter 22 podcast. This is on the respiratory system. And the respiratory system you can think of as like your lungs, but more importantly, it's how we get oxygen into our blood supply and get rid of carbon dioxide. The picture I want to start with here is a climber on Mount Everest. Mount Everest is so high that the amount of oxygen there is in the atmosphere drops really low. So if you were to somehow transport me right now to the top of Mount Everest, I would instantly pass out. And so climbers who climb Mount Everest have to move up the mountain and down and move up, and that allows their body to acclimatize for that. Now, athletes have figured out this process as well. And so this is Levi Leipheimer. He's from Montana, just like myself. And what he's, I think, finished third in the Tour de France, so a very good bike racer. But what he sleeps in, or I've read that he sleeps in, is something called an altitude tent. And so what an altitude tent does, allows you to sleep at about 9,000 feet of elevation. And so your body starts to acclimatize to that. What do? You actually produce more hemoglobin and your red blood cells get bigger. And so now when you start to race, you can carry more oxygen, and so you can go faster. The cool thing about an altitude tent is that you can wake up and then you can train at sea level at a really high intensity. And so what is this chapter about? It's simply about moving oxygen in and moving carbon dioxide out. So before we get to the human respiratory system, let's talk a little bit about how it's found in other animals. And so there are two things that are required for any respiratory surface. And the first one is it has to be wet. And the reason why is oxygen's moving in and carbon dioxide is moving out simply through a process called diffusion. And so if it was dry, that's simply not going to work. Second thing that you need is an increase in the surface area. And so one of the simpler forms is just using your skin as a respiratory device. And so amphibians will do this, but same thing here with this worm. And so what they're using is their skin as a surface, and so the capillaries will run right next to that, or the vessels will, and so oxygen will simply move from an area of high concentration outside the worm to an area of low concentration inside. If you get to an insect, they've got a little different system. What they've got is they've increased the surface area on the inside, and so they have tiny little holes called spiracles along the side of them, and so what happens is air moves in, and it actually branches through these tiny microscopic tubes until each of those tubes eventually plumbs or goes to one individual cell. And some of the bigger insects will have to move their body in and out. Sometimes they use that during flight to actually pump that air in and out, kind of like an accordion. Next, we've got the arrival of gills, and gills are found in animals that live in water. And so fish is an example of a gill, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But what you try to do with a gill is you increase surface area, and then we also want to have water rushing over the surface of that. And so there's as much surface area in the gills of a fish as there is throughout the whole rest of their body. As we move on to land, we get actually more oxygen, but we lose that wet environment that we need to move it in, and so we move that wet surface inside our body. And so lungs are folded inside our body to keep it moist and also increase surface area, but they have that similar role. It's moving oxygen in. I want to talk about two of these things. First, let's talk about gills. And gills have high amounts of blood vessels found within it, but they also utilize something called the countercurrent gas exchange. And so if you're a fish, what you do is you move your operculum in and out like that, and as you move it in and out, and you move your mouth like that, you're actually drawing water in and over those gills. As you do that, the blood will actually flow in this direction, and the water will flow in the other direction. And so in science we call that a countercurrent gas exchanger. What does that mean? The water is going from an area of really low oxygen concentration, and it's hitting water that has a slightly higher amount of oxygen concentration. And so we're loading up that water, so you can see here that when the blood now has 60% of the oxygen, it's actually meeting more water that's more rich in oxygen. And so the cool thing about that is we can utilize up to 80% of the water, 80% of the oxygen that comes in is going to actually end up in that blood supply. And compared to those gills, we're really, really inefficient. But the nice thing is that when you move on to land, there's way more oxygen.
of Grecian hospitality. Can you find them? What were the 2 rules? Who had this question? This was the first question for group number 3. Marty.
So when Jason, the Argonauts, arrived, he lets them bathe and eat so they can look He asked them who they were and where they come from because it was considered a discourtesy to ask foreigners anything before they came to something.
Okay, very good. So Jason and his crew, they get off the boat, they walk up the shore, they approach the palace, they knock on the door, and the first thing we learned, you guys definitely got the first rule correct. The first rule was, and this is the one everyone wants to write down, the king can ask questions only after his guests are bathed, they're given a fresh pair of clothing, set of clothing, and they've had a meal. So only after they've eaten, they've bathed, they've had a nice set of clothing, then you can say, who are you and what are you doing in my castle? That's when that can happen. That's the first rule. What's the second rule? Who found the second rule?
I'm not sure if this is right, but because he said, I would kill you if you hadn't eaten at my table.
Very good. You were the first people to get that today. The second rule is it was considered very bad manners to kill someone after they've eaten at your table. This is actually considered to be very bad manners today. When you invite someone over for dinner, you're not really allowed to kill them when dinner is over. In fact, you're not really allowed to kill them during dinner or before dinner. And it's not even bad manners, it's illegal. But back then, it was considered bad manners to kill someone after you had dinner with them at your own table. So those are the 2 important rules. Those are also going to be important when we start talking about the Odyssey, because they're going to come back. So both of those rules end up being important. So after dinner's over, and the king says, so who are you and what brings you to the palace? And Jason says something like, oh, I'm related to Phrixus. I'm here with my really large army of heroes to take away your most prized possession. Aedes is thinking to himself, why didn't I see this boat come up? Why didn't I meet them at the shore? Why didn't I just kill them then? But now it's too late. Now I have to be more creative. So what's the creative way that King Aeetes finds to kill Jason? It's kind of a 3-part process. This was number 12. Whose question is this? Aiden?
He said he had to yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls, and he had to cast the teeth of the dragon into the furrow, and then he had to kill the dragon, and that would come out afterwards.
Okay, good. Let's go back to number 1. Number 1 involved yoking 2 giant bulls. What does it mean to yoke something, Aiden?
There's this big wooden piece that goes on the heaven, and it's I think they tie ropes to it so you can control the animal that's being yoked.
Okay,
So you have control over it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So if you look at that, I drew that was me. I drew that picture. See that picture there? So the yoke is the big wooden thing that goes over the necks of the 2 animals. So you'd have to be kind of a really large, coordinated farmer to make that happen anyway, to get a big piece of wood on top of the 2 bulls. But in this case, you guys mentioned one thing that was special about the bulls. What's the one thing that's special about them that you mentioned?
They're fire-breathing, and they also have bronze hooves.
Very good. There are 2 special things about them. These bulls breathe fire, so they're going to try and incinerate Jason while he's doing this. And they have really big hooves made of bronze, so they're also going to try to kick him to death. So they're special bulls.